The Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaims that freedom from fear and freedom from want are the highest aspiration of a common people, and that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for their health and well-being. Across the U.S., we do not have a human right to housing. Fear, want, and a lack of health and well-being all come from being denied access to housing. In the Philly Homeless Union, here are just a few situations where not guaranteeing our human right to housing has impacted our safety, our well-being, our livelihood, and our health. Our members have lost housing due to landlord neglect that leads to buildings being condemned, due to fires, due to illness or injury, due to job loss during the pandemic and the rents rising like crazy, and not being able to find another place where we can afford first class and security to move in. Losing housing in this country means almost always living in shelter or outside. Here's how that has impacted our health and well-being. When you're waiting for shelter intake, if you doze off in the chair, they send you outside in the freezing wet weather, even if you don't have a coat. When you get through housing intake, they only offer us emergency overnight first come, first served shelter. If you get in that night, instead of just waiting out online for no reason, if you get in that night, you end up sleeping on the floor without being able to bring your own blanket, with the lights on every night and wake up before 5 a.m. It is literally worse for our health to be in the emergency overnight shelter than sleeping outside. We should all have the right to 8 hours of good sleep. If you do sleep outside, you're ticketed and harassed and threatened with arrest by the police for sleeping outside, even when there is no shelter available. And that's in a city that hasn't passed any of the legislation that Grants Pass has opened up for cities. When you do get into a permanent shelter, the toilets don't work. The heat doesn't work. There are no outlets in the room for using a CPAP machine or a nebulizer. There's black mold in the walls and showers. There's no ladder for the bunk bed, and they only have top bunks. Every single one of those situations has caused our members to have illness, injury, and even be hospitalized. Shelters are not our solution for homelessness. Shelters are the system solution to try to avoid having to actually provide housing to everyone. The only way in Philadelphia to get connected with the very limited supply of permanent affordable housing and case management is waiting for weeks in the emergency overnight shelter, then spending months or years in so-called transitional shelters, or being out on the street and waiting to be documented by street outreach for at least 14 months. That long of sleeping on concrete every single night, or sleeping in these overcrowded, unsafe shelters, just to be able to access the waiting list for permanent housing. What they're hoping is that we give up or die before they have to actually help us. We know this is not just a violation of our human rights, it's a symptom of a sick system that prioritizes landlords' wealth over our rest, our safety, our health, and well-being. In Philadelphia, the city spends $1,400 per person per month on these inadequate, crammed together shelter beds, whether they are occupied or not. And in Philly, that's enough to rent a nice one-bedroom apartment. Kristen told us that there's 27 empty houses for every single person who's homeless in America. So in Philly and across the country, as the National Union of the Homeless, we're fighting back using this human rights framework. In Philly, we lobbied City Council to create an ombudsman for homeless services. And through our hard work, persistence, and showing up to tell stories that have never been told in City Council chambers before, an ombudsman is being hired by the end of this year. And we will be ready for them, with organized people telling their stories and following up to show that when we fight together, we can get what we are organized to take. We specifically chose to fight for an ombudsman rather than asking for something like more money for shelters, because it gives us the opportunity to keep organizing, keep telling our stories, and creating places where we can push and expose the system and unite the poor people who don't have access to our basic human rights to demand it back.